He chose that place because it was quiet. The house sat at the edge of a planned neighborhood, where the pavement ended and open land began. It was not fancy, but it was solid. Clean lines. Neutral colors. Everything had a purpose. The yard was trimmed, the driveway clear, the fence straight. Nothing flashy. Nothing careless. For him. Peace mattered more than appearance. He had spent many years living by strict schedules, loud commands, and constant movement. When that chapter ended, he wanted something different. Order without noise. Structure without shouting. A place where he could wake up early, drink his coffee outside, and listen to the wind instead of instructions. The Homeowners Association already existed when he bought the place. He read the paperwork carefully before signing anything. He always did. The rules were basic, nothing extreme. Lawn maintenance, no broken vehicles in the open, quiet hours at night. Reasonable things? He followed them without trouble for the first year. No one bothered him. Then things changed. It started small, almost harmless. One morning he found a notice taped to his mailbox. It said his trash bin had been visible from the street for too long after pickup. The paper was stiff, printed in bold letters, with a warning tone that felt unnecessary. He checked the time. The trash truck had come late the day before. He had rolled the bin back early that morning before most people were awake. Still, he shrugged it off. Not worth thinking about. A week later, another notice appeared. This time, it mentioned the flag near his porch. It wasn't damaged or oversized. It wasn't political. It was simple and respectful. The notice said the placement did not match approved visual standards. That made him pause. He went back inside and pulled out the HOA rules he had kept in a folder. He read the section about flags slowly. There was nothing about placement being restricted in that way. The flag followed every written rule. He set the paper aside and went on with his day. A few days later, someone knocked on his door. He opened it to find a woman standing stiffly on his porch. Her arms were crossed tight against her chest. She wore a bright badge clipped to her shirt and held a clipboard like it was a shield. She did not introduce herself politely. She told him she was with the HOA board. Her voice carried the tone of someone used to being obeyed. She looked past him into his home without asking. She began listing issues. The flag, the trash bin, a piece of equipment stored neatly beside his garage. She spoke fast, like she had rehearsed it. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he calmly explained that he had reviewed the rules and was following them. He offered to show her the exact sections if she wanted. She did not want to see them. She told him she had authority to enforce standards and that he needed to cooperate. She warned him about fines. She mentioned how non-compliance could become a problem. Her words were sharp. But her understanding was shallow. He thanked her for stopping by and told her he would continue following the written. Nothing more. Nothing less. That answer annoyed her. She narrowed her eyes and said she would be keeping an eye on things. Then she turned and walked away without another word. He closed the door and stood there for a moment. He had dealt with people like that before. Different uniforms. Same attitude. The next letter arrived 3 days later. This one was longer. It claimed multiple violations and listed possible penalties. The tone was more aggressive. The language felt personal, not professional. He read it twice. Then he sat down at the table and began a habit he had learned long ago. He documented everything. He placed the letter in a folder. He wrote the date and time of the visit. He noted the exact words she used. He took photos of his property from different angles, making sure the timestamp was clear. He didn't feel angry. He felt focused. In his experience, control often came disguised as concern. People who lacked real authority tried to create it by pushing others around. The louder they were, the weaker their position usually was. The HOA representative did not know that yet. Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure increased. More notices. More warnings. Each one stretched the rules further than the last. One claimed his driveway was too utilitarian. Another suggested his outdoor lighting was not in harmony with community aesthetics. None of it made sense. Neighbors began to notice. One afternoon, while he was checking the mail, a man from 2 houses down approached him quietly. He glanced around before speaking. "She's been doing this to others," the neighbor said. "Most people just give in. It's easier." He nodded, listening. The neighbor explained how small complaints turned into big demands. How fines appeared suddenly. How arguing only made it worse. "Be careful," the neighbor added. "She likes power." That night, another knock came. This time, she did not wait for him to open the door fully before speaking. She stood too close. Her voice was louder. She told him he had ignored her warnings. She said the board was prepared to take action. He asked her to step back from the doorway. She laughed, short and dismissive sound. She told him he didn't get to make demands. That was the moment something shifted. Not on his face. Not in his voice inside. He told her calmly that she was on private property and needed permission to be there. He reminded her that all communication should be in writing. She scoffed and said the HOA had rights. He replied that rights had limits that irritated her more than shouting ever. Could she pointed at his? Yarden said changes would be made one way or another. Then she turned and left. Again, he watched her walk away without reaction. The next morning, he reviewed every document again. Deeds, maps, HOA bylaws, city zoning codes. He compared each claim she made against the written rules. He found patterns. He also found mistakes. Rules she quoted did not exist. Clauses she referenced applied to different sections of the neighborhood. Some areas were not under full HOA control at all. His property was one of them. The realization did not bring satisfaction. It brought clarity. He printed copies, highlighted sections, marked dates. He did not talk about it online. He did not argue with neighbors. He did not confront her again. He waited. That patience confused her. A week passed with no response from him. No changes made. No visible compliance. She expected resistance. Or fear. Or anger instead. She got silence, then she escalated. A certified letter arrived, stating that a formal review would be scheduled. If he did not correct violations within 10 days, the language suggested urgency. The implication was clear. Submit or suffer. Consequences. He placed the letter in the folder. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the table. Staring out the window at his quiet yard, he thought about all the times people assumed force was the same as authority. All the moments when calm preparation had defeated loud confidence. He had learned long ago that the strongest move was often the quietest one. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful. Lawns trimmed. Cars parked neatly. No sign of the tension building beneath the surface. To most people, it was just another HOA dispute. To him, it was something familiar, a test of boundaries. And this time, the person pushing those boundaries had no idea who they were dealing with. The story was only beginning. The days after the certified letter felt heavier. He went about his morning routine, but every sound outside the scrape of a lawnmower, the hum of a passing car, seemed louder. It wasn't fear. It was awareness. He knew the HOA representative would not wait long before trying to push again. Some people, he thought, think the world bends to their will. Most of them are wrong. The next encounter came unexpectedly. He was checking the mailbox when he noticed her car parked across the street. The bright HOA sticker on the windshield made it unmistakable. She didn't wave. She didn't knock. She just stepped onto the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning everything like she was marking territory. He walked back to the house slowly, keeping his hands visible, staying calm. He didn't want an argument outside. That was her arena, where she thrived on spectacle. Inside, he had control. She called out. "We need to talk about the violations," he replied from the doorway. "All correspondence should be in writing. Please respect that." Her face tightened, but she didn't step back. "You can't just ignore me. This is serious. Not ignoring. I'm complying with the rules. You will find nothing here that violates them." Her eyes flicked to the fence line, then the yard, then the small shed he kept neatly against the side of the house. "That shed isn't in compliance. The paint is wrong. The positioning is wrong. You need to fix it. He blinked, then said slowly, deliberately, every structure on my property follows the local codes and HOA bylaws. That includes the shed. Her lips pressed tight. She made a note on the clipboard as if writing something invalidated the rules themselves. Then she said, "We are prepared to escalate if this continues." "Escalate how?" he asked, voice even. "I have followed the rules. If you have questions, please submit them formally." She frowned, frustration seeping through her practiced composure. She turned and walked back to her car. He watched her go, noting the way she stomped slightly with each step. A small thing but revealing. She was not used to being questioned calmly. Inside, he closed the door and exhaled. He poured coffee and sat at the kitchen table. He pulled out his folder of documents, the deeds, the HOA bylaws, the zoning codes, and began reviewing everything again. Every word mattered. Every clause, every date, every exception. Neighbors began to notice something about him, though most kept it quiet. They would see him outside, walking the property slowly, clipboard in hand, pen poised, not shouting, not panicking, just surveying. Some whispered about it. "He doesn't just talk," one neighbor said to another. "He plans." A few days later, another letter arrived. This one was heavier, filled with accusations and warnings about fines that could accumulate quickly. She had crossed the line from advice into threats. He didn't panic. He didn't curse. He went over each point methodically, checking every claim. Many were inaccurate. Some were downright false, but all were written in a tone meant to intimidate. He documented each one. Photo evidence, dates, cross-references with the bylaws, even noting when she had visited without permission. Each item went into his growing binder of preparation. At the same time, he began a quiet campaign of observation. He didn't hide, but he didn't draw attention either. He noted the patterns when she drove by, who she spoke to, how she handled other neighbors, even small things like the order in which she wrote complaints. One morning, a neighbor from across the street came over. She was hesitant, glancing around as if worried someone would overhear. "She's doing the same thing to us. Most people just pay the fines and move on. We thought maybe you might know something." He nodded, listening carefully. He didn't offer advice. He simply asked questions. When did she come? What did she say? Did she provide any written evidence? After the neighbor left, he considered the situation. The HOA had grown bold. It was no longer about rules. It was about control. And he knew control could be broken, not with anger, not with force, but with discipline, patience, and preparation. A few days later, she returned. This time, she had brought another board member, someone younger who looked nervous. They knocked on the door in unison, but he didn't answer immediately. When he did, he stood firmly behind the threshold. "I need to inspect the property," she announced, voice loud enough to carry to the street. "Inspections require written notice," he said calmly. "You do not have permission to enter." Her companion looked uncertain. She tried to assert dominance. "We have authority. You need to comply." "I follow the rules," he said. "You have no written notice. You are trespassing if you enter without it." The tension was visible. Her face flushed, but she didn't press further. After a moment, she left, muttering under her breath. The companion lingered briefly, then followed her. He closed the door and leaned against it. He didn't smile. He didn't shout. He simply prepared for what was next. He knew the board would escalate to a formal hearing. That was their next move, and he was ready. Over the next week, he gathered more evidence. Photographs of the shed from different angles, measurements of the driveway, notes on landscaping, copies of all letters received. He even made a timeline of visits, noting who was present and what was said. He spent hours reviewing every law he could find about property rights, HOA limitations, and city codes. Every word of authority the board claimed was checked against real rules. Neighbors watched silently, some curious, some nervous. They could feel the tension building, but they also saw his calm. He never yelled. He never made threats. He simply prepared. Then came a small victory. One of the letters she sent contained an error reference to a rule that didn't exist. He highlighted it, made a copy, and filed it carefully. It was not dramatic, but it was important. Accuracy mattered. In the right hands, errors could undo attempts at control. A week later, a few more neighbors gathered quietly. They spoke in hushed tones. "He's not like the rest of us," one said. "He's patient. He's ready. He doesn't just comply." Another nodded. "It's almost like he's expecting this." Indeed, he was. His life before this had been structured. Discipline, observation, attention to detail. These were habits he had learned over decades. Now they served him in a very different arena. Meanwhile, the HOA representative became more visible in her frustration. She would drive slowly past the property, sometimes stopping, sometimes watching from a distance. Her attempts to provoke a reaction failed. He remained calm, always calm. When she tried calling, he let it go to voicemail. Every message she left was saved. Every interaction documented. Nothing was spontaneous. Everything was evidence. The pattern became clear. The HOA representative was overstepping her authority, but authority alone was not enough to stop him. He had prepared for exactly this scenario. He had the patience to let her move first, the discipline to respond correctly, and the knowledge to dismantle her claims when the time came. In the meantime, life on the property continued normally. He mowed the lawn, repaired the fence, maintained the driveway. Each act of care was a quiet statement. "This is my property. I follow the rules." No more. No less. He did not need to shout it. She would see it soon enough, and the neighborhood would notice the outcome. Even sooner, this was not just a dispute over small rules. This was about respect, boundaries, and understanding. That control cannot be claimed through intimidation. Alone, the HOA representative had no idea what she had. Started, but he did, and he was. Ready, the story was only beginning to turn. Days passed in the quiet house, but the tension never left. Each morning he followed the same routine, but his mind worked differently now. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't panicking. He was preparing. Every step he took outside, every measurement, every glance at the property had purpose. He knew that the situation was about more than rules. It was about someone trying to control what did not belong to them. He spent hours at the kitchen table going over documents, making detailed notes. Every letter, every visit, every claim she made was written down. Some neighbors whispered about it, but most stayed silent. They didn't want trouble. They didn't want the spotlight. They had seen how she treated people who resisted. One afternoon, he decided to take a more organized approach. He cleared the dining table and laid out all the documents in order. Property deeds, city zoning codes, HOA bylaws, and every notice she had sent. He even included emails and notes from neighbors who had witnessed some of her visits. Each piece of evidence was tagged with dates and brief descriptions. It was not about anger. It was about clarity. He didn't just focus on the documents. He began noting patterns in her behavior. She visited on certain days, usually when neighbors were away. She called at odd hours, hoping for an emotional reaction. She used language meant to intimidate, not inform. Each pattern became another piece of the puzzle. At night, he reviewed local property laws. He read case studies, past HOA disputes, and rulings. Each law, each precedent, gave him confidence. Knowledge, he knew, was stronger than anger or intimidation. The board thought their authority was absolute. They were wrong. A week later, the HOA representative returned. This time, she brought a new strategy. She parked her car in front of his driveway and stepped out with papers in hand. She approached with a confident stride as if expecting compliance. He opened the door slowly. She stopped abruptly, not expecting him to be calm. "We need to settle these violations immediately," she said, pointing at the property. "I have reviewed the notices and my property complies with all written rules," he replied evenly. "Any concerns should be submitted in writing." Her face tightened. We are prepared to impose fines if you do not cooperate. He remained quiet, letting the words hang. Then he asked, which specific violation? Please cite the rule exactly. She hesitated, clearly unprepared. You know what the violations are? You've received notices. I have, and I have documented every claim. If you want to discuss specifics, please provide them accurately in writing. For a moment, she seemed frustrated beyond measure. She raised her voice slightly, but he stayed calm. No hand gestures, no quick retorts, just stillness and focus. Finally, she turned and walked back to her car. He watched carefully, noting the way she glanced at the property, trying to assert authority even in retreat. Inside, he poured a cup of tea and sat at the table, reviewing everything again. He wasn't intimidated. He was ready. The next step, he knew, would likely be a formal hearing. And he had planned for that. Over the next several days, he compiled all evidence into a detailed binder. Photographs, letters, emails, notes from conversations, property measurements, and references to local laws. He even prepared visual aids to make each point clear. Organization, he knew, would be his advantage. Neighbors noticed subtle changes. Some approached quietly. We've seen what's happening, one said. We didn't know how to handle it ourselves. He listened without giving advice, but he explained calmly. Preparation is key. Know your property, know the rules, and document everything. That is enough to protect yourself. Word began to spread quietly. Other residents who had suffered under the HOA's heavy-handed approach watched him carefully. Many were too fearful to act themselves, but they took notes. Hoping they could learn from his calm strategy, the HOA representative, unaware of the extent of his preparation, continued her visits. She began making small errors in her letters, citing rules incorrectly and referencing codes that didn't apply. Each error became another point in his growing binder. Accuracy, he knew, could dismantle intimidation faster than confrontation. One afternoon, a neighbor came by with concerns about their own property. He spoke gently, guiding them through the process of documenting notices, taking photos, and checking the law. It's not about fighting, he said. It's about knowing where you stand. The neighbor left reassured, leaving him with a sense of quiet purpose. His actions were not just for himself anymore. They were becoming an example for others. A few days later, Faye sent another letter, this time indicating a formal review meeting. The language was aggressive, implying immediate consequences. But he didn't react with panic or frustration. Instead, he began planning. He mapped out every possible scenario for the hearing. He prepared his binder with all evidence organized, ready to present facts calmly and clearly. He anticipated the representative's arguments and prepared counterpoints. Every potential exaggeration, misstatement, and false claim was accounted for. His preparation extended beyond documents. He reviewed his own behavior, ensuring he would remain composed no matter what happened. Anger, he knew, could be used against him. Calmness, on the other hand, demonstrated control and authority. As the day of the review approached, he reflected on his past experiences. Discipline, focus, and preparation had served him well in much tougher situations. This was different, but the principles were the same. Control came from knowledge and patience, not force. On the evening before the meeting, he walked around the property slowly. Every fence post, every corner of the shed, every line of the driveway had been measured and documented. He visualized the presentation, imagining how to calmly explain each detail if questioned. The neighborhood was quiet. No one was outside. No one watched. But he could feel the weight of what was coming. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He simply prepared. Neighbors peeked quietly from their windows, curious but too fearful to approach. Some whispered about his discipline. Others simply nodded silently, seeing in him a reflection of what they wished they could do. The night passed without incident. He slept soundly, confident that preparation would carry him through. The morning of the review arrived. He dressed neatly, nothing flashy, nothing confrontational. He reviewed his notes one last time, ensuring that each fact, each document, Each photo was in order. When he arrived at the meeting, the atmosphere was tense. The HOA representative was already there, her presence loud and commanding. But he did not react. He stood calmly, presenting his documents in order. Pointing to each reference clearly and without emotion, neighbors who had attended quietly were impressed. The contrast between his calm preparation and her nervous aggression was clear. She tried to speak over him, but each interruption was met with precise references to the rules. Every claim she made was countered with evidence. The board looked at the documents. They checked each reference. They saw the errors in the notices, the consistency in his records, and the legality of his property. The weight of authority shifted quietly, subtly, but definitively. By the end of the meeting, the room was silent. The representative had no response to the carefully prepared evidence. Her attempts at intimidation had been neutralized. Every neighbor in the room understood that control had not been achieved through force. Knowledge, preparation, and calm discipline had prevailed. He left the meeting without celebration. No cheers, no boasts, no anger. He returned to his property quietly, maintaining the same routine as before. His yard was neat, his driveway clear, and his shed perfectly positioned. Nothing had changed outwardly, but everything had changed beneath the surface. The HOA had learned, whether they admitted it or not, that authority without preparation was powerless. Control could not be forced. Boundaries could not be crossed when met with patience and discipline. He continued his life as before, quietly observing, calmly documenting, and maintaining his property. The neighborhood noticed the shift. Some felt hope. Others felt cautious relief. The balance had changed, but the peace remained. He had won without confrontation. Not through anger, not through force, but through preparation, patience, and knowledge. The lesson was clear. Control is only as strong as the person trying to impose it, and in this quiet neighborhood, he was the one who held the advantage. The story was far from over. But the turning point had arrived. The morning of the formal hearing arrived calm and clear. He stood outside his home, taking in the quiet neighborhood. The sun cast soft shadows across the lawns, and the breeze carried a faint scent of freshly cut grass. Everything seemed peaceful, ordinary, almost deceivingly simple. But inside him, he felt a focused determination. He had prepared for this moment for weeks. And now it was time to act, not with anger, not with showmanship, but with calm precision. He dressed neatly, nothing flashy, nothing to draw unnecessary attention. His clothing was practical, clean, and professional. He carried his binder carefully, each document organized, each photo labeled, every note prepared. He paused at the door, taking a deep breath. Today was the day he would prove not just to the HOA representative, but to the board and neighbors that authority cannot override the law, facts. In proper procedure, arriving at the meeting, he noticed the tension immediately. The HOA representative stood near the front of the room, scanning the small crowd, trying to assert control with her posture and sharp glances. Other board members whispered among themselves, some nodding nervously at her words. A few neighbors had come quietly, curious and cautious, their faces showing a mix of concern and anticipation. The meeting began with the representative presenting her claims. She spoke quickly, her voice loud, confident, and insistent. She pointed to parts of his property she claimed were violations, referencing sections of the HOA rules, but her citations were vague, inconsistent, and in some cases, outright inaccurate. She tried to make each statement sound like fact, as though repetition would make the errors true. He waited calmly. He didn't interrupt. He didn't frown or make gestures. He simply listened, taking notes in his binder. Every exaggeration, every error, every unsupported claim went onto a separate sheet for reference. He had expected this. Preparation meant anticipating not just facts but tactics. She was relying on intimidation, hoping that bluster would be enough to win. When her presentation ended, the room fell silent. All eyes turned toward him. He cleared his throat gently, stood straight, and began. He presented his binder systematically. First, he addressed the claimed violations point by point. Each claim was countered with a clear reference to the law or HOA bylaw. Every photo, every measurement, every note was presented calmly, methodically, and clearly. He did not shout. He did not argue. He simply demonstrated facts. When she tried to interrupt, he remained calm. "Please allow me to finish presenting the evidence," he said quietly but firmly. His tone was respectful, yet unwavering. The board members hesitated, unsure of how to respond to someone who remained composed. Despite being challenged, he showed that the shed on his property complied with local codes, that his driveway and landscaping were within HOA regulations, and that every letter he had received contained errors or misapplied rules. He also presented his documentation of her unscheduled visits, demonstrating attempts at intimidation and trespass. Each point was backed with clear evidence: photographs, legal references, timestamps, and official records. Board members leaned in, reviewing his evidence. Their murmurs reflected surprise. Some exchanged glances, realizing the strength of his case. The representative grew visibly frustrated. She raised her voice, attempted to correct his claims, but her words were easily countered by the evidence in front of them. She could no longer rely on repetition or intimidation. Facts now dominated the room, he continued, moving through the binder with careful attention. He highlighted errors in her citations, referencing the exact rules that applied to his property. He showed dates, photos, and documentation proving compliance. Every claim of violation crumbled under the weight of preparation. The precision and clarity of his presentation contrasted sharply with her hasty, emotional statements. At one point, he paused, looked around the room, and spoke directly to the board. "Authority does not give the right to disregard the law. Compliance cannot be demanded without clarity, accuracy, and respect for boundaries. My property complies with every rule, and I have documented every interaction to demonstrate this." A few board members nodded subtly, impressed with his professionalism. The representative's face flushed with frustration. She tried to regain control by raising her voice again, but it had lost its power. The facts had shifted the room. The quiet, methodical strength of his preparation outweighed her aggression. He then addressed neighbors' concerns, not by lecturing or arguing, but by demonstrating the process he had followed. Documentation, knowledge of the law, and calm observation are key. You do not have to fight loudly to protect your property. You protect it by understanding it, recording it, and presenting it clearly if challenged. He noticed subtle glances from other residents. Some whispered to one another, clearly learning from his example. Others simply nodded, relieved that someone had stood firm without conflict. His presence had not only defended his property, but also set an example for the neighborhood. The representative attempted a final point, insisting that her authority allowed her to enforce penalties regardless of discrepancies. He responded calmly, citing the exact legal limits of HOA authority. He explained that any fines imposed without proper documentation or legal basis could be legally challenged, and that her attempts to intimidate him outside of formal procedure had been noted and recorded. At this moment, the room shifted. The balance of power was no longer with the aggressive representative. The board saw that her claims were unsubstantiated, her tactics improper, and her approach flawed. Her confidence faltered as the methodical presentation of facts revealed the truth. When the hearing concluded, the board deliberated briefly. They reviewed the evidence he presented, compared it to the representative's claims, and considered the legal references he provided. In the end, the decision was clear. His property was fully compliant. Any fines previously threatened were dismissed. The representative's aggressive claims were rejected, and a reminder was given to all board members about the limits of authority and proper procedure. He remained calm throughout the announcement, listening quietly. He did not cheer or taunt. He simply acknowledged the decision and collected his binder. The room, once filled with tension, now felt lighter. Neighbors exhaled quietly, some smiling in relief. The representative's expression showed frustration, surprise, and a grudging recognition that her approach had failed. He left the room quietly, not drawing attention, not speaking unnecessarily. Outside, the air felt different. The The sun was warmer, the breeze softer. The neighborhood was the same, yet something had changed. Authority had been tested, boundaries had been respected, and fairness had prevailed. Over the next few days, the neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm. Children played quietly in yards, neighbors mowed lawns, and cars moved along the streets without tension. But quietly, residents who had witnessed the hearing spoke to each other in hushed tones. Aware that the balance of authority had shifted, he returned to his daily routines, tending his yard, repairing small parts of the property, and maintaining order. Nothing had changed outwardly, but inwardly. The confidence and calm that came from preparation had strengthened. He knew that control could only be exercised where knowledge and patience were lacking, and he had proved that they could not overcome reasoned, disciplined action. The HOA representative did not visit again in the same aggressive manner. She still sent notices occasionally, but they were accurate and procedural, lacking the intimidation she had relied on before. The neighborhood noticed the difference, believed that the aggressive behavior had ended. He continued to document, not out of fear, but out of habit. Each record served as a reminder that preparation and calm observation were powerful tools. He remained vigilant, not because he expected further conflict, but because he understood that peace was maintained through awareness and knowledge, not through assumption or hope. Neighbors quietly acknowledged his success, some even seeking guidance for their own situations. He advised patiently, showing how documentation and understanding of the rules were sufficient to prevent unnecessary conflict. His example became a quiet lesson in resilience and disciplined action. Life returned to its quiet rhythm. He maintained the property with care, not to prove a point, but because it was the right thing to do. The neighborhood, too, found a new balance. Aware that authority could be questioned and that boundaries had real weight, he walked through his yard one evening. Looking at the well-kept lawn, the neat driveway, and the carefully positioned shed, everything was as it should be. No one had overstepped. No one had forced compliance where it was unnecessary, and the quiet of the neighborhood returned. The lesson was clear and simple. Control through intimidation fails against preparation, discipline, and knowledge. Authority without understanding is empty, and respect for rules, boundaries, and fairness can overcome aggression without anger or conflict. The story had reached a turning point. He had won not through confrontation, but through methodical action and calm resolve. The neighborhood had learned that quiet strength often outweighs loud demands, and he, having maintained his principles and his property, returned to the life he valued peaceful, orderly, and under his control. The final stage of this conflict was near, but the victory already felt complete. He knew that maintaining vigilance, continuing proper documentation, and living by principle would ensure that peace endured. The HOA had been reminded of the limits of authority. Neighbors had been inspired, and his property and his quiet way of life was secure. This victory was not loud or dramatic, but it was absolute. The balance had shifted, and the lesson had been learned. The neighborhood was quiet again, but it carried a different feeling now. It wasn't just silence. It was relief. The tension that had built over weeks of letters, visits, and threats had dissolved. The HOA representative no longer had the confidence to intimidate, and the board understood that authority without evidence and procedure could not stand. The main character walked along his property that morning, noticing details with a calm appreciation, the neat edges of the lawn, the orderly shed, the driveway clear of clutter. Everything was as it should be. He had learned long ago that true strength was quiet. It didn't need to announce itself or show off. It worked methodically with patience and focus until the goal was achieved. Today, he walked slowly, savoring that quiet strength. He knew the battle was over, at least for now, and that the lesson had been made clear. Respect boundaries, follow the rules, and document everything. Over the next few days, neighbors began to speak to him more openly. A few had resisted the HOA in small ways themselves, quietly hoping to maintain some control over their own properties. Others had stayed silent, afraid of conflict, but now they felt encouraged. They approached him with questions, not about confrontation, but about how to protect themselves, how to understand the rules, and how to maintain peace without submitting to intimidation, he answered patiently. He explained that fear was never a strong foundation. Control came not from shouting or threats, but from understanding, preparation, and calm action. He shared the simple steps he had taken: document everything, know the law, and maintain composure. It wasn't about being aggressive. It was about being ready. The HOA representative, for her part, had retreated into a quieter role. Notices she sent were accurate, procedural, and free from personal attacks. She no longer attempted to visit the property without permission. In fact, she seemed cautious now, aware that her previous tactics had failed. The shift in her behavior was subtle, but unmistakable. Authority alone had not been enough to dominate someone prepared and informed. Life began to return to its usual rhythm. He mowed the lawn, repaired minor issues, maintained the shed, and kept the driveway clean. Children played quietly in the neighborhood, and neighbors worked in their gardens. On the surface, nothing had changed. The homes looked the same. Cars lined the streets. Lawns were green. But beneath it all, the balance of respect had shifted. The main character spent some time reflecting on the events. He thought about how easily people assume authority equals power. The HOA representative had believed that her position gave her the right to control more than the rules allowed. She had assumed fear and pressure would force compliance. But preparation, patience, and calm observation had shown her otherwise. Knowledge had outweighed aggression. Discipline had outweighed bluster. Neighbors, who had witnessed the hearing and the documentation process, quietly acknowledged the lesson. Some had even started to apply it themselves. Notices that once would have caused stress were now met with calm review, documentation, and reference to the rules. The neighborhood, once nervous, under heavy-handed control, now felt steadier, more confident, and more aware of the importance of boundaries and proper procedure. The main character continued his routines without fanfare. Each day he maintained his property with care, not to prove a point, but because it was the right thing to do. He tended the lawn, checked the shed, and kept the driveway clear. Each act was a quiet affirmation. Order and discipline were their own reward. At the same time, he remained vigilant. Documentation continued, not out of fear, but out of habit and principle. Each letter received, each interaction observed, was recorded calmly. He knew that peace was maintained not through assumption, but through awareness and preparation. This vigilance was subtle. It did not interfere with life. It simply existed, quietly reinforcing boundaries and ensuring that respect for the property and its rules remained clear. Neighbors occasionally asked him to review letters or explain processes. He did so patiently, demonstrating how to read carefully, note discrepancies, and respond appropriately. No one needed to be loud or confrontational. They learned to rely on clarity, facts, and calm presence. The lessons he imparted were subtle but effective. Knowledge, preparation, and patience could protect them far more than fear of fines or threats ever could. The HOA representative's presence dwindled. Her once frequent visits stopped, and her letters became purely administrative. The atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted from tense to relaxed. People still followed the rules, but they did so confidently, knowing that respect and proper procedure would protect them from